total shutdown march. Let's now go back to ChriseldaLewis, who is in Harare. Criselda, the ZEC announcing results. There's a little bit of a worry with regards to the presidential results, which have not yet been announced, as I understand it. Take us through that.
Well, that's right, Nzinga. We did hear from the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission Chair, Justice Priscilla Chigumba, indicating that shortly after the National Assembly results are announced, they will start with the presidential election results from the constituencies, and but we're expecting that to take quite long in terms of what the official results will be. You'd know that we did get an indication from the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission that that official result might come as late as the 4th of August, as it is prescribed in terms of the Electoral Act. And I think of great concern, Nzinga, at this point as well. I'm not sure if you can see those visuals on your screen. Just about an hour ago, some of the members of the Movement for Democratic Change Alliance, who are not happy with the current results that show that ZANU-PF has headed towards a 2/3 majority in terms of seats in the National Assembly, came towards the gates of the results center, and a large police contingent was deployed here. I understand, now that I am speaking to you, those protests have now moved into the Harare CBD. There is some flames of fury there, where some of the protesters are burning some of the ZANU-PF flags. And of great concern, I think, at this point is that if this is the reaction from members of the Movement for Democratic Change Alliance now, what will then happen if the final result does indicate that Emmerson Mnangagwa is the victor in this particular election? Recall that the rhetoric that we've had from the leader of the Movement for Democratic Change Alliance since the very beginning was that he was not going to accept defeat in this election. He had long pronounced that he was the victor in this election. So really concerning scenes that we're seeing at the moment, even after the international observers who have been observing this election have pronounced that they believe that the elections were conducted in a free and fair manner. I'm hearing from one of my colleagues now that the chairperson of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission has just answered a question, saying that or any of those who believe that there are allegations of fraud in these elections should come forward with the necessary evidence. But at this stage, I think it would be quite dangerous for anybody to insinuate that there was any electoral fraud involved in these particular elections without bringing any evidence forward. And in particular, because this is in a very long time, we've never seen this kind of environment, Zimbabweans going to the polls in such a free environment, devoid of any violence. So now when we see these kinds of scenes in the Harare city center, it certainly is of concern at this stage.
Criselda, you speaking about the environment that you've observed as a reporter, saying there hasn't been violence where you've seen. Do you know, or do you get a sense in the further, the more rural areas of Zimbabwe, there have been some complaints about possible intimidation there and possible violence? Talk to us about that.
Well, that's right, Nzinga. In fact, when we started hearing about those reports was first from the Zimbabwe Election Support Network yesterday, who also alluded to the fact that in some of the rural areas, and as we heard from some of the international observers today when they gave their preliminary report, they indicated that there were pockets of intimidation in some of the rural areas, for example, where some of the voters were being wooed into voting for a particular political party, being threatened with having their food parcels taken away. Some of the traditional leadership, as I alluded to much earlier, we heard that from the Zimbabwe Electoral Support Network yesterday, and also from the international observers today. There are some similarities in these preliminary reports that seem to suggest that in the rural areas you had very minor incidents where people were being told to vote for a particular a party, but in terms of violence, absolutely not. About 2%, if I understand correctly, from the Zimbabwe Election Support Network, saying that at only 2% of the country's polling stations were there incidents of intimidation and where people were threatened with violence, but not much of that at all. In fact, we had one of the international observer missions say that this was a watershed moment for Zimbabwe towards democracy. So I think in the majority, a free and fair election. Many of the Zimbabweans, the election observers, are saying at this stage, but I think of greater concern now is what is going to happen as these results continue to trickle in and after the final result has been announced, because the official opposition is saying that they're not going to accept it.
ChriseldaLewis coming to us live from Harare in Zimbabwe. They're giving us an update. Just one of the members of the SABC team who's following that election closely across Zimbabwe for you. And we will be following that story as those results start trickling in. For now,